Greetings to you, lovely children of God, light workers and shadow workers. It is such an honor to be able to speak to you in this way through this human by the name of Troy again. My name is Kazaya, and I am a seraphim. We've been preparing this message for a while. This will be the first of two parts to this message, this teaching, which we are titling The Light Realms and the Dark Realms. And this is to pontificate on the 12-dimensional model that we introduced in the last teaching. And in that, we described a circle cut up into 12 sections or 12 layers. And each of those 12 layers is a different dimension. You're in the third in the earthly realm, especially as long as you were thinking in very physical, dense, earthly terms. And this is simply a model for us to work with that you can understand. We do not wish to give you exact blueprints or anything of all of the cosmos. However, we wish to clarify some things and how you may be able to live closer to us in the divine realm. So, this teaching will be titled The Dark Realms. And the next teaching, the second part of this, will be talking about the light realms. That will be a bit different. This one, many of you will be able to relate to as you've experienced what we will be talking about. So, to introduce this large two-part teaching to get this understanding into your minds and this human world, imagine that you can even apply this to the 12 in a circle model of the dimensions. Imagine that you have a flashlight, uh, a light bulb as humans would call it, and this light is above everything, and it is shining a radiant and mostly cone-shaped beam. And just as with your flashlights, the light is always most intense and bright at the bulb, at the center, the source. And then it stays bright for a bit, but gradually as you get further and further away from that bulb, you can still see the light, but it becomes a bit more scattered and dim, not as focused, further away from the source. You can think of the dimensions in this way. And this next part of this teaching, we can say we've been preparing in Troy for quite some time now. For months, he's been on a purification and probation process. And the next, he's agreed to be an example of the next model, you could call it, that you may know as the seven deadly sins, according to what some religions have described them as. And we would like to preface by clarifying that these are the primary categories of what you could call sins. We will clarify what that word means. However, there are actually many more than seven of these distractions. And we'll be using these 7 categories as the primary categories. Many of these other distractions and sins can fairly clearly fit into each one, but there's so many distractions that we won't be getting into all of them tonight. So, speak about the sins. Let us clarify what that word means. Some of your organized religions have used this word. In your recorded history, you think it's actually a very old word. And in some ways it is, according to your recorded history. And the word sin actually originates from the practice you call archery. And many of you know that archery practice requires a bullseye or a target, usually with a dot in the center and then rings around it. The bullseye is the target, but they have historically used the word sin for many of your centuries now in this practice to reference when the arrow does not hit the bullseye, when it it's off target. And simply the word sin was adopted by some of your organized religions because archery had become actually a popular practice at some times and phases in older history that you call the Middle Ages, because it was essential for knights and warriors to practice shooting arrows. So, each of these 7 deadly sin categories does not mean that you will go to hell by having done any of these. We will be pontificating on this in future teachings, but we would like to say that there is infiniteness as well as unconditional love for each of God's children, no matter where you're at in any of the dimensions, any of the densities. Just as we said, there may still be probation periods depending on where you've come from. So, the first sin we would like to talk about, a sin category called wrath, and a similar emotion that many of you would also describe this as is anger. Wrath is the more actionable term, result of anger, and it is a display of lashing out, of revenge, of violence, of retribution. It can take many forms. So this category, distraction category, we would like to call it, is just like the others, when it is out of balance and you allow for wrath or anger and such actions to essentially rule you, to drive you, to motivate you. That is a bit out of balance, out of character, we could call it. And these imbalances draw you a bit further away from the vibrational particle waves of the the supreme almighty source. This is a bit complex to describe how this happens. We'll be describing more of how in the next and future teachings. But the simple truth is you cannot just quickly go through and exist in, cross over to, you might call it, the what you call higher dimensions, higher densities, even in the afterlife. You won't be able to access certain things and certain vibrations and levels of that, if your soul and part of you is still resonating with any of these seven distractions. And we will say that most of these, even Troy has struggled with for some time at some point in his life, believe it or not, when he was much younger, long before the soul exchange. His soul counterpart indeed had amazing wrath. Fortunately for that boy, he was able to control himself to a degree in which he did not draw blood or take life, even though he was provoked to at some points. There was also a bias towards much purity and peace and equilibrium even with him back then. So, one of the antidotes for wrath and anger, vengeance, vigilance is forgiveness, practicing compassion and love. Especially forgiveness is a very powerful healing practice, as it is not a means of justification for what someone else may have done. Rather, forgiveness is a a means of setting yourself free from having a strong emotional connection to what someone else may have done or anything you dislike about them. It is simply cutting your tethers and allowing them to be within their own space, whatever they choose to do with that, if it is continuing their untoward actions and ill behaviors, that is their responsibility. Forgiveness will set you free from the distraction of wrath, revenge, and retribution. The next sin we would like to talk about, many of you, all of you really can relate to, have had exposure to this, possibly practiced it, and it is called lust. Now, it is very normal and natural for humans to grow up through the puberty process and then throughout adulthood desire and practice what you call sex. And that's just how the human species and all species have survived, populated, reproduced, and continued, as no individual organism is granted permanent immortality in one body. So, we would like to say that sex is actually a very sacred act and can be a tool for spiritual evolution. We can elaborate on that in a future teaching. However, it is very unfortunate that many, what do you call adolescents, are raised sometimes without brighter virtues, and some adolescents are exposed to some very ugly ways of thinking of sex and very ugly things in certain dark media sources. And it is unfortunate that this teaches such young and developing brains to what you call objectify another person simply for their body. Their body is a sacred temple. And so back to the distraction of lust, when this this distraction from your individual truth, which your inner spirit knows and has always known since you were born, when the distraction of lust is allowed to become imbalanced and unhealthy, this draws the attention and thinking patterns of a person. It can draw someone away from thinking and behaving and acting in what you can call moral virtues. And if it is in a practice in a way that is disrespectful to another person and disrespectful to the self as well, then that energy just continues in the person and possibly the person's life with others as disrespect. And we we observe this. It is quite unfortunate that when children are conceived, sometimes accidentally, what is the worst travesty is in a criminal way, such as what you call rape, and a child is conceived out of a very dark state of thinking, very dark state of acting. Everything that both of the parents are will go into that child's body, and then they will inherit that, those potentials anyway. There is still, we can talk about this in another teaching, but there is still possibility for such children to grow up and behave in moral ways depending on the nature of their soul. So the antidote to out of balance and unhealthy lust and objectification for a person is practicing love and kindness in such sexual beliefs, behaviors, and actions and ways of thinking. Loving kindness and recognition for the beauty and raw creative power of the nature vehicles you embody is what will bring lust from an unhealthy state back to something more neutral and allow you to be your authentic spirit. The next sin we would like to talk about is sloth, what you call sloth, even though that word is actually an animal. However, this distraction is also what you call laziness and just being immobile, being a little bit aloof, sometimes quite aloof, and not so much active, not caring for the self, sometimes disregarding bodily hygiene, perhaps sloth may result in excessive clutter, excessive unsanitary conditions. Sloth, though, when out of balance, can really bring a person to be unmotivated to do anything. Sometimes they become hermits who don't even do anything other than sit around home. Sometimes sloth, this distraction when out of balance, can be a pattern of the wounded inner self, the wounded spirit, what you might call a wounded inner child. And in some ways, this is actually something like wounded dark feminine energy. It can be in women and men, but the passive and insecure, afraid and doubtful voice that helps or enables a person to believe that they are not strong enough, not not charismatic enough and will not be able to get out and achieve an idea, a dream. So the antidote to sloth, this laziness distraction, is finding that inner spark of passion, inner spark of creativity. And even if it's something creative on the computer, on a device at first, paying attention to that, really embodying enthusiasm. This word enthusiasm is actually quite interesting as it has its more ancient roots in a word that's something like entheos, meaning God or philosophy, and enthusiasm actually translates to God-filled. So when you can cultivate your creativity to counteract excessive sloth, then you'll be able to eventually activate and reach a certain state of enthusiasm, filling yourself with the more active aspect of God power within you as a child of God. Now, the fourth sin distraction category we'd like to speak about is pride. And some have said that pride is the root of all of these distraction categories. Pride has its connections to what some have called unhealthy ego, arrogance, sometimes even domineering, sometimes arbitrary when it's pushed to its extreme, perhaps. But pride is sometimes in line with narcissism, as people know it, and a little bit of pride, simply self-confidence, is healthy. However, if it is allowed to overcome you, and if you become disconnected from others, lose all of your caring from others, become so selfish that you allow others to be perhaps in danger, even if you have all the perhaps wealth and resources and power to help others, or that you can utilize however you choose to live in your pride and simply ignore anything in the world that you can perhaps help, or being within yourself so much that you ignore what some people call the status quo. You ignore the simple facts and what seems to be truth of reality around you. And in a very, we think, unhealthy state, pride can become narcissism to the degree of what some may call bullying, and what the prideful person probably knows is very degrading and detrimental to others. However, either takes some pleasure in watching their pain or just does not seem to care, especially if they can receive some sort of rewards from it. So, if you wish to balance this unhealthy distraction of pride, the antidote to pride is altruism, practicing empathy, and truly cultivating at least some sense of caring, if not taking action for providing for the needy of this world, for listening to what other people say, developing a sense of at least some self-introspection to the degree of listening to and respecting the perspectives of others when they are perhaps calling you out on your excess pride or narcissism and calling you out. And that doesn't have to be that they're bullying you or picking on you, but it is simply that they may be uh, there to help you open that inner eye of understanding how you are being of detriment to others. The fifth distraction category that we'd like to talk about is greed. And even Troy has had his patterns and moments in the past of greed. More people than I probably imagine have dealt with some level of greed at some point in their life. Even some of the kindest people you know have dabbled and danced with a little bit of greed here and there, even in an unbalanced way or unhealthy way. And this category of greed is really related to the last category called pride in the way that it is selfish. And especially when it becomes unbalanced, it tends to hoard or steal, even claim money, resources, objects for itself. And quite often, the things it hoards and claims doesn't even need, the, the actual soul and person doesn't even need. And sometimes this greed, especially in an excessive unbalance, ends up with the person either hoarding or accumulating or stealing too, um, so much of what they're after, um, whether it's just essentials or jewelry, nice things, or lots of money, then they usually end up with a lot more than what they need. We like to say that greed only paints red on the hands of those who think that they need. And this is unhealthy when when the person doesn't even give to others and they have a lot more than what they even need to provide for themselves or save for their future, as you call it, and have enough for their family. And similar to the last category of pride, it can become detrimental to the individual when they are so selfish that they ignore anything that other people need when people are dying simply from starvation, from not having enough, from sometimes some such individuals are actually in such a what you call impoverished situation because of the greed and the wealth hoarding of those who you call in power. So the antidote to greed, unhealthy and excessive greed, is similar to pride really, but giving, becoming selfless, learning that yes, you are worth a lot. You are a precious child of God, but also learning that when you truly have more than enough, then it's okay to give to help others, especially those you can trust who know that they're going to use the resources or money for a good purpose. And you may find that by sharing, by giving, then your heart opens a bit more and your spirit opens a bit more. And by releasing, neutralizing this imbalance of greed, you may actually end up with more wealth because when, especially in the case of theft, if greed brings you to be a thief, in any sense, you're only stealing from yourself. You're not actually gaining for yourself if you steal from others and steal things that aren't essential to you, because that's just also teaching your spirit that you don't have enough and that you're small and that you need to rely on such resources and objects and stealing them to be what you think is you, what you have come to believe is you. However, by giving a little bit, sharing a bit of equanimity and equity, community, then that is truly giving to your soul and self to practice and expand and brighten and utilize the light within you as a child of God. The sixth next category, which we'd like to speak about, is gluttony. And this category is especially relating to hunger and the stomach, appetite. Quite often, gluttony happens as an excess when a person is traumatized and they de- it's basically a method of what you call a coping mechanism. And this coping mechanism, some resort to food, comfort foods, as you call them. Some can also resort to what you call drugs and harmful substances. Such a practice can fall within the category of gluttony, giving in to impulse more than practicing your intelligent, sympathetic, intuitive, rational mind. And gluttony, in the case of, for example, comfort foods and overeating, can tie in also with the category we mentioned earlier called sloth. And it can create sometimes laziness, sometimes just mindless eating because consuming, and even if it's whether it's food or what you call alcohol or drugs or something else distracts the mind from the pain that is stored within your underworld and your subconscious. And if the mind is distracted from that, then it does not have to feel it and do anything about it. Gluttony can also, though, in some cases without trauma, it can be somewhat of a primitive way of being when in excess, and that is giving into the hunger and the craving desires of the gut, which sometimes are driven by what you call a certain type of bacteria that's craving the foods that feed them. For example, you may have seen depictions of certain kings and royalty who may have been practicing an excess of gluttony and possibly even sloth and pride and overeating, indulging in a continuous flow of food because they can afford it and because it's given to them. However, this doesn't really teach them anything as a soul or get them to move or change or help their people. For example, if you find yourself with an excess of gluttony and know that it is causing detrimental issues, perhaps in your body and life, the antidote to it is moderation and learning that you have enough, learning that you yourself are enough. The antidote to it is gratitude, also in a more emotional and spiritual way. Troy keeps a gratitude journal, and this can be a very helpful tool to start writing about things that you're grateful for every single day. And as you practice gratitude, you will start to find that you appreciate even the little things that you have, that you start to learn that it's not necessary to indulge to feel good, to feel grateful for life, to feel good about living every single day, to then start appreciating life perhaps as if it's your last day on earth, to start living as an enthusiastic, God-filled being, a child of God. And the seventh and final of these supposedly deadly, distracting sin categories that we should to talk about is envy. And envy is really an ugly thing. Jealousy is another word for it, perhaps. And envy is a distortion in the way you look at people and some of the things they have. Being jealous or envious of what someone else has, being jealous or envious of the car, vehicle they drive, the house or home they live in, being envious that maybe they make more money than you, or envy can also be sometimes as simple and what some might call insignificant as just envying the food that someone eats, the clothes that they wear, envying a person's abilities even. If you have not cultivated your what some may call psychic or innate abilities as a child of God, some have even become jealous or envious of what you call psychics, people with their innate abilities awakened and activated. Envy is a trap, and when it is out of balance, it is it is a limiting distraction. When a person is in a pattern of envy, this energy keeps them in that state of scarcity and literally blocks them from being able to create and manifest and attract, or at least becomes a huge challenge for them to do so, to even achieve and have what they envy from other people that other people have that they don't. And so in this way, envy can also tie into greed. They can feed into each other if a person is envious of others and are telling themselves that they do not have enough or they're not good enough, that they don't have as great of a vehicle or home or as great of a thing as what someone else has. Unfortunately, these two distractions can lead a person down the paths of theft and stealing what another person has or trying to. So, the antidote to envy, if you find yourself in this and are aware that it is a detriment to you, is appreciation for what you have, as well as appreciation for what other people have, the wealth that they have, the blessings they've received from the Almighty Supreme Source. And by appreciating, by being happy for what someone else has, by hoping that they even get more of it, they do well in their endeavors, by reciprocating and projecting that energy flows through you, and then you also, that opens the pathway, the doorway for that energy to come back to you, because anything that you put out always has to come back to you, negative or positive. So if you find yourself in an unbalanced cycle of being distracted and in an unfavorable condition in your life based on any of these 7 distraction categories, some of the powerful ways to break out of them and start to create changes in your life, move in a different direction, are forgiveness, compassion, gratitude, empathy, appreciation, altruism. And these and other virtues we'll be talking about also in the next teaching titled The Light Realms. And we'll also be introducing more about some of the other dimensions, as well as the the 12 in a circle dimensional model, and how this all relates to your relationship with the divine and the divine realm. This has been an honor to be able to convey these messages to you, to convey this knowledge, wisdom. Always remember that you are loved unconditionally by us beyond measure, that you are never alone, even in the moments that you think that you are alone. There are always spirits with you. If you feel stuck, if you need help, just get clear with yourself about what you want and ask us. Ask the divine realm. There will be an answer, a blessing provided to you as a child of God. Always remember to stop to smell the flowers. Listen to the flowers. Put your bare feet on the earth, on the grass. Hug the trees and let the sun see you and grace you with its rays in a very direct way. All is well. Mm. Well, hello everyone. That was another interesting and informative, um, for me, felt like high energy um, channeling from Kazaya the Seraphim. And I am very grateful that he was able to do that, and um, that we were doing this together, conveying these messages. I sincerely hope that you may have received some benefit from that and those messages. Kazaya is a seraphim being who speaks with me, teaches me things, um, teaches me these lessons, and delivers these lessons every Tuesday. And so he asked to channel through me, um, because I have a connection with the angelic realm. Um, he has to channel through me at this time, as he has many lessons and wisdom to share with this world. This is just the beginning, and he has, I can tell, a very long plan of lessons that he'll be delivering regarding how to get closer to the divine realm and also your innate divine self. So if you have any questions for Kazaya that you believe Kazaya can ask, or they believe Kazaya can answer about spirituality, about ways of living, religion, philosophy, anything related to the materials that he shares, feel free to drop your question in the comments down below, and he will do his best to answer any of the questions that are asked, especially as they pertain to each lesson. So, thank you for viewing, and I wish peace to you. Bye for now.